The most brutal betrayal in Kurir Jadi Suami Miliarder isn't the fancy billionaire stuff, or the public humiliations, or even the constant traps being set like cartoon snares with real-life consequences. It's that quiet, everyday kind of betrayal where you realize you've been somebody's ladder for years, and the second they reach the top, they turn around and call you dead weight. That's the emotional engine under all the glossy melodrama here, and it's why this drama hit me harder than I expected, even when it's being ridiculously extra on purpose. Welcome back to Bongo Gaming, and yes, I know the channel name sounds like I should be reviewing a boss fight, but today we're reviewing a human being getting comboed by life. If you enjoy these long, story-first drama reviews, consider subscribing. And spoiler-wise, I'm keeping it light, premise, tone, craft, and character dynamics, but I'm not going to march you through the biggest late-game reveals like a spoiler vending machine. So the setup, in plain terms, is the kind of premise that feels like it was designed in a lab to make you angry in under 5 minutes. Chandra Santoso is a courier, not a loser, not a slacker, not a won't work guy. He's working. He's the kind of poor that comes with constant motion. And he spends years financing his wife's college, putting her future ahead of his own, believing in the week of marriage like it's a contract with a soul attached. Then she divorces him because he's poor. Not because he cheated, not because he was cruel, because he doesn't have money. That specific detail matters, because it's not just heartbreak, it's a verdict. It's someone looking you in the eye and saying your value is your bank balance, and I'm done pretending otherwise. And right away, I want to give the drama credit for something. It doesn't treat that moment like a quick inciting incident you sprint past on the way to the billionaire mansion. It lingers long enough to let the humiliation breathe. Not in a voyeuristic way, but in a sit-with-it way. It understands that getting left isn't always the worst part. Sometimes the worst part is realizing that the person you protected is now embarrassed to be protected by you. Here's the part where I admit something a little personal, because it shaped how I watched this. I have a soft spot, maybe an overly sharp sensitivity, for stories where someone's labor gets invisibilized. Not just work, but emotional labor, sacrifice, the unsexy kind of support where you're carrying someone else's dream because you love them. So when Kurir Jadi Suami Miliarder frames Chandra's poverty as something he's punished for, after years of giving, it poked that nerve. I didn't just think, oh no, poor guy. I thought, oh, that feeling. That exact feeling. And then the drama does what these dramas love to do, it throws fate at him like a brick with a ribbon on it. Chandra helps a conglomerate figure, Bhaskara Subrata, and that good deed becomes the hinge that swings his whole life into a different genre. Suddenly we're in contract marriage territory, with Chandra entering a marriage arrangement with Bhaskara's granddaughter, Sinta Subrata. And if you just heard, contract marriage, and your eyes rolled so hard you saw your own brain, I get it. I get it. I have rolled those eyes. I have rolled them professionally. But hold that reaction for a second, because the way this drama uses the trope is, not perfect, but smarter than it initially looks. Because the contract marriage isn't introduced as a fantasy prize. It's introduced as a complication. And that difference is everything. When a story frames a rich family marriage as the poor guy's reward, it becomes shallow wish fulfillment. When it frames it as a poor guy entering a world with rules designed to crush him, it becomes a pressure cooker. Kurir Jadi Suami Miliarder mostly chooses the pressure cooker. Mostly. It still likes its glossy moments, but it understands the central tension. Money doesn't just buy comfort, it buys control, access, narrative power. In the Subrata world, people don't argue, they negotiate. They don't apologize, they calculate. And Chandra, with his courier-honed instincts and street-level patience, is suddenly standing in rooms where smiles are weapons. Let me paint you one of the show's strongest early vibes without locking it to a specific, this happens in episode X, kind of claim. There's a stretch where Chandra is still psychologically living in the aftershock of the divorce. You can feel it in the way he carries his body, shoulders slightly forward, like he's bracing for impact, eyes scanning faces for the next insult. The camera language, at least in the way the drama presents his world versus theirs, leans into contrast. His spaces feel tighter, more functional, more worn in. The Subrata spaces feel like they echo. You know that rich person echo? Where a footstep sounds expensive, the show uses that emptiness to emphasize that wealth can be cold. Not lonely, exactly, cold. Like you could yell and your voice wouldn't hit anything soft enough to absorb it. Now, if you're watching for pure revenge fantasy, the ex-wife element is going to be your gasoline. Because yes, she doesn't just leave. According to the storyline, she keeps trying to trap him. That's the drama's ongoing antagonistic thread. The person who should have become a closed chapter keeps reaching back into his life like a hook. And I can already hear the comments from a mile away, people wanting her to get what she deserves, people counting the seconds until the humiliation boomerangs. The show definitely knows that audience appetite and it plays to it, sometimes a little too eagerly. But here's a contrarian take, and I mean this respectfully. I don't think the ex-wife being awful is automatically bad writing. I think it depends on whether the drama uses her as a cartoon punching bag or as a mirror for the story's themes. When she's written as pure evil, it's cheap. When she's written as someone embodying a system, status obsession, transactional love, the belief that dignity comes from proximity to money, then she's not just villain, she's a thesis statement. The problem is that drama wobbles between those two modes. Some scenes feel like they're inviting you to think. Others feel like they're inviting you to point and throw popcorn. And that wobble is basically the whole show in miniature. Kurir Jadi Suami Miliarder wants to be emotionally grounded and wildly sensational at the same time. Sometimes that mix is exactly the fun. Sometimes you can feel the gears grinding, like the show is deciding whether it wants you to cry or cheer within the same breath. But stay with me, because the reason I kept watching wasn't just the anger hook or the trope hook. It was Kandra's rebound arc, and specifically the emphasis, at least in the storyline framing, on him rising through his own ability. That's a key detail. He doesn't just get carried by the Subrata name. He builds career momentum. He becomes someone who can solve problems. He ends up saving the Subrata family from a crisis. That's a different fantasy than poor guy gets rich. It's ignored guy becomes undeniable. And those are not the same emotional meal. There's a particular satisfaction in competence arcs. Not just wealth, not just glow-ups, but competence. When a character learns the rules, outthinks people who assumed he'd stay small, and starts making decisions from a place of self-respect rather than desperation, it's like watching someone straighten their spine in real time. The drama leans into that spine straightening, and when it hits, it hits. Also, can we talk about the title for a second? Kurir Jadi Suami Miliarder is so blunt it's almost funny. It's like the show is saying, yes, you are here for the trope. Stop pretending you're above it. And honestly, sometimes I appreciate that. There's a certain honesty to it, like a street vendor yelling what they sell. No poetry. Just, here's the product. The question is whether the product has actual flavor or just sugar. One of the smartest choices that drama makes, again, when it's in its more thoughtful mode, is using the contract marriage not as instant romance but as a credibility test. How do you behave when you're suddenly being watched by people who have never had to be kind to survive? How do you hold your dignity when you're constantly being evaluated, not as a person, but as a risk? Kandra walks into that family orbit with none of the armor the rich characters have. He doesn't have the correct vocabulary. He doesn't have the correct posture. He doesn't even have the correct kind of silence. And the show knows that silence can be class-coded. The wealthy can be quiet because they are safe. The poor are quiet because they are careful. And Sinta Subrata is the wild card in all of this. She could easily have been written as a cold heiress who slowly melts, or a spunky rich girl who slums it for love, or a saintly savior who rescues him from poverty with her feelings. Those are the default flavors. The storyline doesn't give me enough to claim exactly which direction the drama goes in every scene, so I'm not going to make stuff up. But I can talk about the dynamic the premise sets up, because it's inherently interesting. Sinta is a bridge and a gate at the same time. She is the person who can legitimize him in that world, and also the person whose presence raises the stakes of every mistake he makes. In a contract marriage, intimacy is always tangled with strategy. Every tender moment has a question mark attached. Is this real, or is this performance? That question mark is basically the romance tension. And whether the drama makes you feel it depends on how it handles chemistry. Not just, are they cute together, but do they feel like two people with different power positions negotiating the same room? Does Cinta's gaze linger with curiosity, or does it scan like an appraiser? Does Chandra speak to her like a person, or like a ceiling he's afraid to touch? The best contract marriage stories are basically about consent and control disguised as romance. The worst ones are just cohabitation fluff with product placement lighting. And yes, I'm going to be that person and talk about lighting, because it matters here. This type of drama lives and dies on contrast, the warm grit of before, the sleek cold of after, and then the eventual visual blending when the character finds a new identity that isn't defined by either world. When the cinematography leans into sterile brightness for rich spaces and more textured shadows for working-class spaces, it can become cliché. But when it's done with intention, when the camera frames Chandra smaller inside big rooms, or uses negative space to make him feel outnumbered, it creates empathy without needing a speech. And I'll say this, the pacing of the early stretch, at least in the way the storyline implies this arc progression, is designed like a slingshot. Divorce humiliation, chance encounter with Bhaskara, contract marriage with Cinta, ex-wife's traps, and then Chandra's rise. That's a lot of engines running at once. The risk is whiplash. The reward is momentum. The show's job is to make those engines feel like one machine instead of 5 separate machines taped together. Here's where I got pleasantly surprised, the drama seems to understand that Chandra's real transformation isn't financial. It's internal. Because the most dangerous thing about being left for being poor isn't that you're alone, it's that you start believing you deserve it. You start negotiating with your own dignity. You start thinking love is something you must earn with output. And when that mindset follows you into a contract marriage, it can get toxic fast. The show's most meaningful moments are the ones where Chandra stops trying to prove he's worth loving and starts acting like he already is. Now, let me give you a mini-scene retelling, more like a memory of a feeling, because this is where the drama's melodrama actually becomes cinematic in my head. Imagine Chandra at the edge of a public space, courier bag strap digging into his shoulder, the kind of strap that always feels like it's cutting you no matter how you adjust it. There's noise around him, traffic, chatter, maybe a phone vibrating with another delivery. And he's holding himself together, barely, because he has learned to swallow humiliation quietly. Then a conversation turns sharp. You can almost hear the air change when someone says the word, poor, like it's dirt. His face doesn't explode into rage. It does something more painful, it freezes. His eyes blink like he's trying to clear a smudge that's actually inside his chest. And the camera, if it's doing its job, doesn't rush to comfort him. It lets you sit in that sting. That's the kind of scene that makes you lean forward, not because something happened, but because you recognize the psychology of being dismissed. And then, because this is a drama, it doesn't let him stay frozen. It pushes him into action through Bhaskara. I'm careful here because helping a conglomerate can mean a lot of things, and I'm not going to pretend I know the exact incident. But the point isn't the mechanics of the rescue, it's the moral framing. Chandra helps without calculating the reward. That matters, because in a story obsessed with money and status, the one character who does good without a price tag becomes the moral anchor. And when Bhaskara, a man who represents the top of the economic pyramid, responds to that goodness by pulling Chandra into his family's orbit, it becomes this uneasy exchange. Is it gratitude, or recruitment? That question, gratitude versus recruitment, is where the show's power dynamics get juicy. Because contract marriages are never neutral. Someone benefits more. Someone controls the terms. Someone is being used, even if they consent. And the drama, at its best, lets that discomfort exist. It doesn't pretend a rich family offering a poor man a marriage contract is purely romantic. It's also social engineering. It's image management. It's a decision made in boardroom language, even if it's executed in wedding attire. And since this is bongo gaming, let me say it like a gamer for half a second, Chandra gets thrown into a new map with enemies disguised as NPCs. Everyone smiles, everyone welcomes him, and you can feel the hidden health bars. Okay, that's my one little aside before I go right back to being emotionally sincere, because the show actually earns sincerity more often than you'd expect. The ex-wife's continued attempts to trap him are where the show risks tipping into repetitive frustration. It's a fine line. On one hand, ongoing antagonism gives Kandra a consistent obstacle, a living reminder of who he used to be and what he escaped. On the other hand, if every time he takes a step forward she appears like a scripted jump scare to yank him back, it can make his growth feel stalled. Growth arcs need escalating challenges, not copy-paste sabotage. The storyline suggests escalation because the stakes widen into the Subrata family crisis and Kandra's career building, which is promising. The key is variation, different kinds of traps, different kinds of pressures, different kinds of wins. And wins matter. Not wins like he gets a new suit. Wins like he makes a decision that surprises you. Wins like he refuses to beg. Wins like he chooses patience over pride, or pride over comfort, at the right time. The show is basically asking, what does honor look like when you're poor, and what does honor look like when you're suddenly adjacent to extreme wealth? Because those are different tests. Poor honor is often about survival without losing your soul. Rich honor is often about restraint, what you could do but choose not to. Something else I appreciated is the potential for Bhaskara Subrata to be more than a walking ATM. In a lot of these stories, the patriarch is either a saint who blesses the couple or a tyrant who exists to be overthrown. Bhaskara, by premise, is the one Kandra helps, which already gives their relationship a moral origin. That origin matters. It means Bhaskara's interest in Kandra isn't random, it's tied to character. And that can create a genuinely interesting intergenerational tension. Does Bhaskara see Kandra as family, as tool, as redemption, as proof that goodness still exists outside his money bubble? If the drama explores even half of that, it has real weight. But if it doesn't, if it turns Bhaskara into a plot vending machine who dispenses opportunities whenever the story needs a boost, then it wastes one of its richest dynamics. And yes, I heard myself. Richest dynamics. Unintended pun. I'm leaving it in. Let's talk about Sinta more, because romance is the bait a lot of people will come for, and it's also where these dramas can accidentally reveal their values. A contract marriage story can either reinforce a fantasy of money fixes everything, or it can challenge it by showing that money amplifies what's already there: insecurity, pride, selfishness, tenderness, fear. The best versions make the relationship a negotiation where both people are changing. Not just the poor guy being upgraded. Not just the rich girl learning to eat street food and becoming humble. Real change is messier. It's learning each other's language and also learning when to refuse translation. And I'm going to say something that might annoy people who watch purely for swoons. I actually hope the drama doesn't rush the romance. I hope it makes it awkward. I hope it makes it conditional at first, even a little ugly. Because the premise is inherently uncomfortable. If the show tries to make the contract marriage feel instantly fated and soft, it's lying to its own setup. The contract should feel like a bruise on the romance until the characters earn something real underneath it. Now, emotionally, the biggest hook for me wasn't will Kandra become rich? It was will Kandra stop letting other people define his worth? Because that's the real villain in the story, not just the ex-wife, not just the rich family's politics, not just the crisis that hits the Subratas. It's the idea that dignity is rented, not owned. And because he's a courier, someone whose job is literally to carry other people's packages, it's such an on-the-nose metaphor that it should feel corny, but it kind of works. He's been carrying everyone else's life. The question is when he finally sets the load down. There's also a structural thing the drama is doing, and you can feel it even from the premise summary. It's stacking humiliations early so that later victories feel cathartic. That's a classic melodrama technique. It's also risky because if you over-humiliate your protagonist, it can turn the audience numb or impatient. You start thinking, okay, enough misery, I get it. Kurir Jadi Suami Miliarder walks right up to that line. Sometimes it toes it with real emotional logic, and sometimes it kind of dares you to keep watching out of spite, like, are you going to abandon him too? Which is manipulative. But it's effective. I kept watching. And when I say manipulative, I don't mean it as an insult. All dramas are manipulative. Music swells, shots linger. Dialogue lands on a button. The question is whether the manipulation feels earned. This show occasionally hits you with emotional cues that feel a hair too loud, like it doesn't trust you to feel the sadness unless it underlines it 3 times. But then it will pull back and give you a quieter beat, Chandra alone with his thoughts, Chandra choosing dignity over retaliation, and suddenly the show feels confident again. Music and sound design are a big part of that confidence. In stories built on class contrast, sound is texture. The buzz of a phone, the squeak of a delivery card, the hollow hush of a luxury hallway, the soft clink of expensive glassware, those details can do more work than dialogue. When the soundtrack leans into melodramatic crescendos, it can push scenes into soap territory. When it uses restraint, or even silence, it lets you live in Chandra's internal state. And I'm always more impressed by a drama that understands when not to speak. Here's a question that kept me hooked: what happens when a man who's been treated as disposable becomes essential to the most powerful family in the room? Because that's what the storyline promises. He doesn't just survive, he becomes the one who saves the Subrata family from crisis. That flips the power fantasy in a satisfying way. It's not, look, the poor guy got lucky. It's, look, the rich people were vulnerable the whole time. Wealth is not invincibility. It's just a different set of risks. And the drama's title sort of dares you to assume it's going to be simple: Kurir becomes billionaire husband, end of story. But the better version of this story is actually about identity. If Chandra becomes the billionaire's husband, does he disappear inside that label? Does he become a mascot? A charity case? A symbol? Does he lose the part of himself that survived the divorce? If the show is brave, it will make that identity tension real. Because there's a kind of violence in being saved, too, if the saving comes with ownership. There's also the angle of masculinity, and I don't think you can talk about this premise without touching it. Chandra is emasculated by poverty in the eyes of his ex-wife. That's not just personal cruelty, it's social programming. Men are taught that providing is love. So when he funds her education, he's performing love through provision. When she leaves him for being poor, she's essentially saying his love performance failed. That's why the wound is so deep. It's not just heartbreak, it's identity collapse. And watching him rebuild identity, through competence, through self-respect, through love that isn't purely transactional, can be genuinely moving if the writing gives it time. But again, the show has a melodrama engine, so it sometimes reaches for the loudest version of emotion instead of the truest one. A trap is set, an accusation is thrown, someone storms out, music spikes. The trick is whether the performances keep it believable. And while I'm not naming actors since we're working from storyline info, I can talk about performance choices in general. The best way to play Chandra is not as a saint. It's as a man fighting bitterness. If he's too pure, he becomes boring. If he's too angry, he becomes unsympathetic. The sweet spot is a man who wants to lash out but chooses a better path, sometimes failing, sometimes succeeding. And Sinta, performance-wise, has to be played with a very specific kind of restraint. If she's too cold, you won't root for the romance. If she's too warm, you won't believe she survived in a conglomerate family. The most compelling version of Sinta is someone who can be kind without being naive, someone who understands power but hasn't fully surrendered her humanity to it. If the drama gives her that complexity, their relationship becomes more than trope. It becomes two different survival strategies learning to coexist. One more thing, I'm actually glad the storyline includes Chandra building his career and not just passively receiving wealth. That's the kind of detail that changes the moral taste of the whole show. Because there's a version of this story that says, poor people just need access to rich people. And that's not a great message, even if it's entertaining. The better message is, people have value regardless of class, and when given a fair shot, or when they fight for one, they can outgrow the boxes society put them in. The career-building arc suggests the show is at least trying to land closer to that. But the ex-wife trap thread complicates it, because it can accidentally turn into evil woman punished, good man rewarded, which is a stale moral binary. The show needs to be careful not to make misogyny its easy fuel. You can absolutely have a female antagonist. You can absolutely have a cruel ex. But it's all in the framing. Is she a person making choices, or a punching bag designed to be hated? The more the drama treats her as a human symptom of a system, the stronger it gets. The more it treats her as a cartoon, the more it cheapens Kandra's journey, because it makes his suffering feel like a theme park ride instead of a meaningful struggle. And speaking of meaningful struggle, the Subrata family crisis element, Kandra eventually saving them, has the potential to elevate the story into something almost Shakespearean in a modern melodrama way. The powerful family, the fragile empire, the outsider who becomes the key. That's inherently satisfying. But it also raises a delicate question. When Kandra saves them, is he saving the people, or saving the institution? Because those aren't the same. If the family is corrupt or cold, saving them could feel morally messy in a good way. If the family is just misunderstood and noble, then the crisis becomes a simple obstacle. The more morally complex the Subratas are, the more interesting Kandra's position becomes. Here's what I'll say about the viewing experience so far. The show's emotional spikes are real. Even when I could see the trope machinery, even when I could predict the shape of certain confrontations, I still felt that itch of, okay, but how is he going to handle this? That's character pull. That's the difference between a plot that happens and a protagonist who moves. And I know some people will come into Kurir Jadi Suami Miliarder hoping it's a pure Cinderella flip, poor guy gets rich, everyone claps, ex-wife cries, roll credits. If that's your only appetite, you might get impatient when the drama slows down to focus on dignity and decision-making. But for me, those slower beats were the meal, because they are where you see whether the writers understand what poverty does to a person's sense of self. Also, I have to admit, the contract marriage setup is inherently delicious for dialogue. Because every conversation has subtext. When someone asks, "You comfortable?" it can mean, "Do you know your place?" When someone says, "Welcome to the family," it can mean, "We're watching you." And when Sinta and Kandra speak to each other, the words can be simple while the meaning is complicated. The best scenes in this kind of story are basically polite duels. And that brings me to something I want to see the show commit to more and more as it goes, letting scenes breathe long enough for micro-expressions to matter. A quick flick of the eyes, a swallowed reaction, a forced smile that arrives half a second too late, those details are where melodrama becomes human. If the editing is too fast, you lose that. If the camera knows when to hold, you gain a lot. Because at the end of the day, the real fantasy here isn't just becoming a billionaire's husband. It's being seen. It's having the people who dismissed you be forced to recognize you. It's the moment when Kandra walks into a room and nobody can pretend he's irrelevant anymore. And if the drama earns that moment through character work, not just wardrobe upgrades, it becomes genuinely satisfying rather than just shiny. But the tricky part, the part I'm most curious about, is how the drama balances romance with autonomy. Because Kandra's victory can't just be getting chosen by Sinta. If his entire glow-up is defined by her love, then the show accidentally repeats the ex-wife's worldview, that a man's worth is determined by someone else's approval. The show needs to make his self-worth legible independent of the romance, even as the romance grows. And the storyline suggests it does, with career building and crisis solving, yet the way the contract marriage is framed could still pull focus. And that's where the chemistry becomes more than, are they cute? It becomes ideological. Do they challenge each other in ways that create mutual respect, or does one person become the other's trophy? Do they become partners, or do they become a headline? The drama plays in a world where public image matters, so the relationship is always at risk of becoming a brand. There's a specific kind of scene type I look for in these stories, the scene where a rich character casually offers money as a solution, and the poor character refuses, not out of pride, but out of self-definition. Not, I don't need help, but, I need help that doesn't erase me. If Kurir Jadi Suami Miliarder nails those moments, it can turn a trope story into a character story. And if it rushes them, it'll still be entertaining, but it'll be lighter, more disposable. What kept me locked in, honestly, was the sense that Kandra is not naturally built for revenge, even when revenge would feel justified. He's built for endurance. Courier work is endurance: weather, traffic, late payments, disrespect, constant movement. That endurance, when translated into a rich family battlefield, becomes something like quiet dominance. Not dominance in the alpha male sense, dominance in the "I outlast you" sense. And there's something deeply satisfying about a hero whose superpower is simply refusing to be broken. Now, before we go deeper into the romance dynamics and how Cinta's position inside the Subrata family changes the emotional stakes, I want to linger on one more craft choice: how a drama like this uses repetition. Repetition can be lazy, or it can be thematic. If the show repeats humiliations, it can either feel like it's torturing Kandra for fun, or like it's illustrating how systems keep trying to push you back into your place. The difference is whether each repeated pressure reveals a new facet of Kandra's character, a new strategy, a new boundary, a new scar. And that's why the ex-wife's continued presence is such a double-edged sword. She can be repetitive poison, or she can be the consistent test that shows Kandra evolving. The first time she traps him, he might panic. The second time, he might hesitate. The third time, he might anticipate. The fourth time, he might set his own trap, not to destroy her, but to free himself. That progression is what would make the antagonism feel purposeful instead of cyclical. Because if the drama is going to promise honor as an end state, Kandra finally gaining honor, it has to show what honor costs. Honor isn't just being applauded at the end. It's the choices you make when nobody will clap. It's the moment you could humiliate someone back and you choose not to, not because you're weak, but because you refuse to become the thing that hurt you. Those are the moments that, for me, separate a fun watch from a memorable one. And I can feel the show building toward those tests, especially with the Subrata family crisis looming in the storyline like a shadow that hasn't fully formed yet. Once the stakes widen beyond Kandra's personal heartbreak into the survival of a powerful family, the drama gets the chance to ask a sharper question: when you finally have leverage, what kind of person are you going to be with it? Because that's the real transformation. Not poor to rich. Not single to married. It's powerless to powerful, and what he does the first time he realizes he can actually move the room, actually change outcomes, actually make people listen. And the most interesting version of Kandra is the one who's still learning how to hold that power without letting it poison him, especially when the people around him, especially in the Subrata orbit, have been drinking power like water their whole lives. Which is why I keep coming back to Cinta, and the possibility that she isn't just romance, but also a lens into how the rich survive their own world. Because Kandra's survival skills are obvious: hustle, patience, grit. Cinta's survival skills would be different: reading subtext, navigating expectations, knowing when kindness is safe and when it's a liability. And when those two skill sets collide inside a contract marriage, the relationship can become either deeply strategic or unexpectedly tender. Depending on how the drama chooses to play the moments where they stop performing and start telling each other the truth, especially in the quiet gaps where neither of them is sure whether the other person is about to step closer or step away. And that uncertainty becomes even more loaded when you consider how much of Cinta's life is probably monitored and judged by the Subrata name, because in families like that, even affection can be treated like a negotiation, and that's where the show can really start to interrogate what love even means when the people around you treat marriage like a merger and affection like a public relations asset. Because when you put two characters into a contract marriage, you're not just forcing proximity, you're forcing definitions. What counts as loyalty? What counts as betrayal? Is protecting someone the same as controlling them? And if you've got any appetite for character drama beyond the surface level, they are fake married but oops they caught feelings, this is where Kurir Jadi Suami Miliarder has the potential to get genuinely interesting. The thing is, a lot of dramas with this premise accidentally make the rich heroine the gatekeeper of humanity, like she's the one who teaches the poor guy what self-respect is. And that always irritates me a little, because it smuggles in this idea that emotional maturity is another luxury item. What I liked about the way this storyline frames Kandra's arc is that his comeback is tied to his own ability. Not Cinta's pity, not Bhaskara's allowance, not the Subrata brand name stamped on his forehead. He rises. He builds. He saves. That matters, because it means Sinta's role in the story doesn't have to be savior. She can be something harder and more compelling: witness, partner, and sometimes even obstacle, depending on what the contract is asking them to sacrifice. And if you're thinking, okay, but does the show actually let her be complicated? That's the big question I kept turning over while watching. Because it's so easy to write Sinta as either an ice queen or a sunshine princess. The more daring choice is making her a person who has internalized her family's power logic, even as she resents it. Someone who has learned to speak in careful half-truths, because in a conglomerate family, being direct is like walking into traffic. If the performance leans into that, controlled voice, measured reactions, the kind of smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes unless she forgets to guard herself, then the romance stops being a trope and starts being a negotiation of safety. Wait until you notice how often the show uses rooms to tell you who has power, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. In a story like this, blocking becomes storytelling. Who stands, who sits, who gets to move first, who's framed in the center, who's shoved to the edge. And Kandra, coming from Kurir life, is used to moving through spaces like he doesn't own them. He's used to being the guy who enters, delivers, exits. That muscle memory doesn't disappear just because he's wearing a nicer shirt. So when he's placed in subrota environments, wide halls, glossy floors, rooms with too much air, the camera can make him look small without making him look weak. There's a big difference. Small can mean vulnerable. Small can mean out of place. But small can also mean, you underestimated him, which is a delicious setup when the arc is about becoming undeniable. And that's where I think the show's visual language can quietly do a lot of heavy lifting, even if the dialogue sometimes goes for the loudest possible punch. If the cinematography keeps returning to frames that isolate Kandra early on, doorways, long corridors, reflective surfaces, then his later integration into those frames becomes a form of storytelling. You don't need a monologue that says, "Now I belong." You just need one shot where he finally stands in the center of a room and the camera doesn't treat him like a visitor. I also want to talk about the ex-wife thread in a way that's fair but honest, because this is where audience emotions can get intense. The storyline says she keeps trapping him. That implies persistence, escalation, and a refusal to let him move on. And the easiest thing for a drama to do is make her nothing but venom so the audience has a clear target. The harder thing is to make her venom feel like it has roots. Not excuses, roots. The difference matters. Rooted villains are more painful and more real, because they remind you this kind of betrayal doesn't come from outer space. It comes from normal human greed and fear and shame. Here's a surprising take that I didn't expect to have: I actually don't mind that the ex-wife keeps showing up, as long as the traps are used to measure Kandra's growth rather than just to punish him for existing. Because if she disappeared after the divorce, the story could turn into a simple upgrade fantasy. Her continued presence keeps the original wound open, and that wound is the point. The show is about honor and dignity, not just romance and money. And the person who stripped him of dignity is, in a grim way, the most fitting recurring test. The danger, of course, is repetition fatigue. If every trap is just a new excuse for people to misjudge Kandra and for him to suffer publicly, then the show becomes emotionally monotonous. You stop feeling the sting and start feeling the writer's hand. But when the traps force him into different kinds of choices, when one trap tests his temper, another tests his integrity, another tests his patience, then the antagonism becomes a ladder for his arc instead of a treadmill. And I need to highlight something about Kandra as a character type that can easily be mishandled. There's a version of him that becomes too passive, too saintly, too willing to be hit. And I get why writers do that. It makes the audience protective, it builds sympathy, it sets up catharsis. But if you overdo it, you accidentally make the protagonist feel like an object rather than an agent. The storyline promises that Kandra rises with his own ability, which suggests agency. So the writing has to constantly prove that he's not just enduring, he's deciding. Even when he chooses not to fight back, that choice needs to feel active, like strategy, not like surrender. If you want an example of what I mean, think about how a scene changes depending on the timing of a character's pause. When someone insults you and you pause because you're shocked, you look powerless. When you pause because you're choosing your words carefully, because you're refusing to be dragged into someone else's ugliness, you look in control. The same silence, different power. Acting is full of that. And this kind of drama lives or dies on those micro decisions. There's a moment type I always look for in stories like this, the first time Kandra realizes he can say no and survive. Not no as rebellion, but no as boundary. Because when you've been poor and dependent and ashamed, you often feel like you can't afford boundaries. Boundaries feel like a luxury. So when a drama shows a character building boundaries, it's showing genuine growth, not just plot movement. And this is where the contract marriage can become more than a gimmick, because contracts are literally boundaries written down. They define what's allowed and what's not. They define what happens if you break the terms. They create a structure where emotions become liabilities. So if Kandra is learning to set boundaries internally, and he's also trapped inside external boundaries, the tension becomes layered. He's trying to become his own person while living inside someone else's terms. That's the heart of the trope when it's done well. Let me give you another cinematic mini-scene, the kind that this premise practically begs for. Picture a family gathering in an expensive house, doesn't matter exactly where, because the vibe is universal. The lighting is bright but not warm, like it was chosen to flatter furniture rather than people. The table is too long. The cutlery makes tiny, sharp sounds when it touches the plates. Everyone is composed, dressed in colors that look expensive because they don't try too hard. And then Kandra enters, maybe a fraction of a second late, because he's still adjusting to this world where punctuality is a form of respect and also a weapon. Conversations don't stop, they just shift. Eyes flick to him, away from him, back to him. A smile appears on someone's face like a stamp of approval that doesn't reach the skin. Someone asks an innocent question, something like, "How's work?" But the tone is a trapdoor. Kandra answers politely. He answers too politely, almost. And you can feel him weighing every word, because one wrong syllable becomes a story about him. That's the Subrata world, everything can become a story. And that's why when the storyline says Kandra eventually saves the Subrata family from crisis, it's not just an action beat. It's a symbolic reversal. The courier who was treated like he didn't belong becomes the one who holds the structure together when it starts cracking. That's not just satisfying. It's poetic, in a blunt, melodrama kind of way. Now, I'm staying light on spoilers, so I'm not going to pretend I know the exact shape of the crisis or the mechanics of how he saves them. But I can talk about what that implies structurally. It implies that the drama isn't content to keep Kandra in reactive mode. It plans to move him into proactive mode. It wants him to be the solution, not just the victim. And that shift is where a lot of dramas either level up or collapse, because proactive protagonists need sharper writing. Victims can be propelled by events. Leaders have to generate events. If the writers understand Kandra's intelligence as something earned, street smarts, people reading, persistence, adaptability, then his solutions will feel organic. If they suddenly make him a genius because the plot needs it, it'll feel like a cheat. The best rise arcs are not about suddenly becoming brilliant. They're about revealing the brilliance that was always there, ignored because it didn't come wrapped in money. You know what else helps sell that? Editing rhythm. Early on, a character like Kandra should feel like life is happening to him too fast. Quick cuts, constant movement, a sense of being chased. As he gains control, the pacing can slow. The camera can hold longer. The cuts can breathe. And if the show does that, not perfectly, not always, but intentionally, it gives you a physical sensation of his growth. Here's another retention hook that hit me mid-watch. At what point does Kandra stop being the poor husband and start being the person everyone fears disappointing? That's the delicious flip. Because fear changes texture depending on who holds it. At first, Kandra is the one afraid of being judged, of being trapped, of being humiliated, of being powerless. Later, in a good version of this story, other people become afraid of him. Not because he's violent, but because he's competent and morally grounded. The worst kind of person to face in a crisis is someone who won't be bribed and won't be bullied. If Kandra becomes that, then the story becomes less about wealth and more about integrity as power. And I want to be clear, integrity is not always nice. Sometimes integrity is cold. It's the decision to walk away. It's the refusal to engage. It's the calm no that doesn't ask permission. If the drama understands that, it can avoid turning Kandra into a bland saint. Also, the romance. Because I can't dance around it forever. The storyline promises love and honor in the end. That means the contract marriage isn't just logistical, it becomes emotional. The key challenge is making that emotional shift feel like it grows out of character, not just proximity. People often mistake chemistry for closeness. Chemistry is friction. It's how two people change the air when they share a frame. Closeness is logistics. The drama needs chemistry. How do you show chemistry in this setup without resorting to cliché? You show curiosity. You show respect forming under pressure. You show a rich character being surprised by the poor character's boundaries. You show a poor character being surprised by the rich character's loneliness. You show them seeing each other in unguarded moments. Not big confessions necessarily. Sometimes it's as small as one person noticing the other person's hands shaking and choosing not to comment. The choice not to comment can be intimacy. Sound design can make those moments sing. A lot of dramas overuse music to tell you what to feel, but when a show chooses to lower the score and let you hear fabric, breathing, footsteps, pen clicking, those tiny real sounds create a sense of closeness. It makes the room feel inhabited. And in a show about class, that matters, because wealthy spaces can feel like museums. You need sensory life to make them feel human. There's another interesting tension baked into the premise: public image versus private reality. A contract marriage implies performance. So the relationship might have public moment, where they play roles, and private moment, where they drop them. A smart drama will make those two modes bleed into each other. Because that's what happens in real life when you perform long enough, you forget where performance ends. You accidentally mean something you were only supposed to say. You accidentally get jealous when you weren't supposed to care. And jealousy in this premise is particularly spicy because jealousy isn't just romantic. It's class jealousy, too. Kandra might envy how effortlessly Sinta moves through her world. Sinta might envy how grounded Kandra is, how his worth doesn't come from other people's approval in the same way, even when he's struggling. That mutual envy can become admiration. Or resentment. Depends how the writers play it. Now let's talk about Bhaskara Subrata again, because the patriarch figure in these stories can either be the moral compass or the moral problem. The storyline says Kandra helps Bhaskara, then enters the marriage contract with Bhaskara's granddaughter. That positions Bhaskara as the bridge. It also positions him as someone who can reshape lives with a decision. That's a frightening kind of power, even when it's used benevolently. And I'm always interested in whether a drama acknowledges the eerie side of that. Because think about it, a conglomerate patriarch sees a struggling courier, feels gratitude or interest, and suddenly that courier's life is rewritten. That's not just kindness. That's feudal. It's kingly. It's the power to elevate and destroy. If the drama is honest, it will show that even good intentions can be controlling when you have that much power. I'm going to be lightly funny again because otherwise we're going to get too heavy, but it's true, rich patriarchs in dramas love adopting a random commoner like they're picking a new pet project. I like your face. Come, join my dynasty. Sir, please. That is a human being. But okay, jokes aside, if Bhaskara is written with layers, he can represent something bigger than nice rich grandpa. He can represent the old guard of capitalism, a man who built or inherited an empire, who knows the cost of power, who might be trying to do one decent thing in a life full of deals. That could create a fascinating triangle: Bhaskara's worldview, Sinta's worldview, Kandra's worldview. Each one has a different relationship to money and dignity. And then there's the question of the Subrata family itself. Conglomerate family, in drama language, usually means internal politics, reputation obsession, and love that's conditional on usefulness. That's not always true, but it's a common texture. If Kurir Jadi Suami Miliarder leans into that, it can create rich conflict without needing random villains. The family becomes the system. And Chandra, as an outsider, becomes the stress test. Here's the real trick: if every rich character is cruel, the show becomes simplistic. If every rich character is kind, the show becomes a fairy tale. The compelling version is mixed. People with money can be generous and still dehumanizing. They can help you and still look down on you. They can love you and still try to control you. If the drama captures that contradiction, it feels real enough to sting. And speaking of stinging, the ex-wife's behavior, her trapping him, can also be used to explore something uncomfortable: the way shame can turn a person into a predator. If she feels ashamed of her past with him, she might try to erase it by destroying him. That's ugly, but it's human ugliness, not cartoon evil. Again, I'm not asking the show to excuse her. I'm asking it to make her choices feel like they come from a believable place, so that Chandra's victory feels like liberation from a real world view, not just from a mustache-twirling antagonist. I also want to acknowledge the gendered risk here. In some melodramas, the ex-wife is written as the ultimate villain while the new love interest is written as a saint, and that ends up flattening women into archetypes: the bad woman, who cares about money, and the good woman, who sees the hero's heart. That's lazy and kind of gross. The better writing gives Cinta flaws and gives the ex-wife at least a coherent psychology. And it gives Chandra accountability, too. Not for being poor, that's not a moral failing, but for how he navigates his own pride, his own resentment, his own temptation to use the Subrata power as a weapon. Because yes, let's talk about that temptation. When you get humiliated for years, and then suddenly you have access to wealth and influence, the temptation to clap back is enormous. It's the fantasy everyone is waiting for. The show will absolutely dangle it. And the most satisfying version isn't necessarily the biggest public humiliation of the ex-wife. The most satisfying version is Chandra choosing not to become petty. That's not as instantly Yas Queen as revenge scenes, but it's more meaningful. It's the difference between winning a moment and winning your life. And I know, a lot of viewers want the moment. I want it too, sometimes. I'm human. Give me a good comeuppance and I will eat it like popcorn. But I've also seen too many dramas mistake cruelty for catharsis. They'll humiliate a villain so hard it starts to feel like the show is punching down, even if the villain deserves it. Real catharsis is when the protagonist steps into their power without losing their soul. That's harder to write, but it lasts longer in your head. Let me rehook you with something else. The drama's title tells you the destination, but the real suspense is the route. How do you become honorable in a world where honor is constantly for sale? That's the question hovering over every scene involving the Subrata family. Because wealth doesn't just corrupt, it complicates. It gives you options, and options are where morality gets tested. When you're poor, sometimes you do the wrong thing because you're desperate. When you're rich, you can do the wrong thing because you're comfortable. Both are human. But the show is clearly interested, at least by premise, in Chandra maintaining honor while gaining power. That's why the saving the Subrata family part matters. It's his chance to demonstrate value in a way that money can't fake. And I want to point out something that the premise quietly suggests: Chandra's heroism is relational. He's not just building a career in isolation, he's saving people. He's responding to crises that affect others. That makes him emotionally accessible. It also sets up a different kind of romantic credibility. When Cinta sees him do something brave or selfless, not for applause, not for money, but because it's right, that's a believable spark. Not he's handsome. Not he's mysterious. It's he's reliable in a way my world isn't. Reliability is hot. Sorry. It just is. And in melodramas, reliability is often more compelling than charisma, because charisma can be faked, but reliability costs you something. Now, as a reviewer, I have to also talk about where the show can stumble technically, because even if the emotional arc is strong, execution matters. One common issue in this genre is tonal whiplash. You'll have a deeply painful scene about humiliation and class shame, and then the next scene is played like a romantic comedy misunderstanding, and you're sitting there like, wait, are we laughing? Are we grieving? If Kurir Jadi Suami Miliarder pulls that kind of switch too often, it can undercut its own emotional credibility. But to be fair, sometimes tonal mix is part of the charm. Life is like that. You cry in the afternoon and laugh at something stupid at night. So it's not about avoiding tonal shifts, it's about whether the transitions feel emotionally honest. Music is a huge factor there. If the score insists on telling you, this is funny now, when the situation still feels raw, it can feel disrespectful to the character's pain. If the score is subtle and lets humor arise from character rather than from comedy cues, then it's smoother. Another craft element is dialogue. Stories about class often fall into speechifying, where characters deliver thesis statements about dignity and poverty and love. And look, a good monologue can be satisfying, especially in melodrama. But it has to be earned. If every conversation turns into a TED talk about honor, it starts to feel artificial. The better approach is letting those themes emerge through conflict: who interrupts who gets listened to, who gets dismissed, who has to repeat themselves to be heard. Those are class dynamics made visible. I found myself paying attention to how the drama likely uses the courier identity, because it can be either a shallow label or a meaningful lens. A courier is someone who navigates the city, who sees multiple worlds in one day, who interacts with rich and poor and everyone in between. That job gives Chandra a unique perspective. He knows how different people treat service workers. He knows how masks slip when someone thinks you're invisible. If the show uses that, it can make him feel quietly perceptive. It can justify his later competence in navigating subrata politics. Because he's been reading people for survival. And this is where performance again becomes crucial. The best portrayal of someone like Chandra is not constant suffering face. It's a man who has learned to smile politely while storing information. A man who has learned to keep his voice steady while his heart is pounding. A man who knows when to look down so someone else feels powerful, and knows when to look up so they realize he isn't afraid anymore. One more personal confession: I had a moment watching this where I got unexpectedly angry on Chandra's behalf in a way that surprised me, and it wasn't even about the divorce itself. It was about the idea of paying for someone's education for years. That's not just money, that's time. That's sacrifice. That's choosing us over me again and again. And then to be discarded because you didn't become wealthy fast enough. That's such a specific cruelty. It's like being punished for believing in the person you loved. And maybe that's why the show's premise feels so sticky, because it taps into a fear people don't like to admit, the fear that love is conditional and you just don't know the conditions yet. And yes, the drama is heightened. It's melodrama. But that fear underneath it is real. Now, the contract marriage with Sinta introduces a different kind of conditionality, and that's what makes it psychologically juicy. At first, the conditions are explicit. Terms. Rules. Expectations. That's almost easier, in a weird way, because at least you know what you're being judged on. Chandra's marriage before was supposed to be unconditional, and then it wasn't. So how does he adapt to a relationship where the conditional nature is out in the open? Does it make him feel safer because it's honest, or does it re-traumatize him because it confirms his worst belief, that love is always a transaction? That's not a plot spoiler. That's just the emotional math the premise sets up. And if the writers are paying attention, they can mine that for genuinely moving moments. And let's not ignore Sinta's side. If she grew up around contracts, business contracts, social contracts, image contracts, then being in a contract marriage might not feel unnatural to her. It might feel like Tuesday. The interesting part would be what she's never had, someone who sees through the performance and still chooses her. Someone who isn't with her because of the Subrata name. Someone who isn't afraid of her power but also isn't trying to use it. That could be deeply destabilizing for her, in a good way. Another rehook, because this is the hinge, when romance finally starts to feel real in a contract marriage, it's not because they kiss, it's because one of them breaks a rule for the other and doesn't regret it. That rule breaking is where the relationship becomes character-driven instead of trope-driven. It could be something small, like choosing honesty when the contract says, keep up appearances. It could be choosing to protect the other person's dignity even if it costs them socially. Those are the moments that make you believe. Now, about Kendra, saving the Subrata family from crisis. I want to emphasize again that this is where the show can either deliver a meaningful payoff or fall into convenient plotting. If the crisis is something only Kendra can solve because he has unique skills and perspective, it will feel earned. If it's something only he can solve because everyone else suddenly becomes incompetent, it'll feel like the show is forcing heroism. But the premise gives the writers a great tool to avoid that, Kendra's outsider status. Outsiders often see solutions insiders can't because insiders are trapped by pride, tradition, and self-interest. In a conglomerate family, people might be too busy protecting their image to make the hard choice. Kendra, not being emotionally invested in their status games in the same way, could make a cleaner call. That's plausible. That's satisfying. That's also a comment on class. Sometimes the people at the top are the least capable of dealing with real consequences because they've been insulated. And if Kendra's career building is woven into that, if his growth gives him the tools to handle the crisis, then it becomes a coherent arc. His career isn't just success porn. It's preparation. That's good writing when it's done right. I also want to talk about the honor part of the premise, because honor can be a tricky theme. It can turn preachy fast. But in this context, honor is actually a practical question. What does Kendra do when he has the opportunity to exploit the Subrata family's power for personal revenge? What does he do when he could destroy his ex-wife socially but chooses a different path? What does he do when he could become arrogant but chooses humility? Those are honor choices. And here's where the show can get points from me if it avoids a simplistic moral lesson. Honor should not be portrayed as never getting angry. Honor can include anger. Honor can include calling people out. Honor can include refusing to be treated poorly. The most honest version of honor is not passivity. It's strength with restraint. If you've ever been in a situation where someone underestimated you, you know the sweet, dark temptation to show them. This drama understands that temptation is part of the hook. It wants you to hunger for recognition the way Kendra does. That's why the humiliation scenes are so sharp. They create an appetite. And the later victories, career success, saving the family, earning love, are the meal. But a drama can oversalt that meal. Too many humiliation scenes and you get tired. Too many victories too quickly and it feels unearned. The balance is everything. One thing I found myself appreciating is the potential for the Subrata family crisis to reframe Bhaskara's relationship with Kendra. At first, Bhaskara might view him as a grateful beneficiary or a useful addition to the family's image. But when a real crisis hits, gratitude gets tested. It's easy to be generous when things are stable. It's hard to respect someone when the stakes are high and you're afraid. If Kendra becomes instrumental in saving them, then Bhaskara's respect becomes something Kendra earns, not something he receives. That shift would be emotionally meaningful because it turns the helping a conglomerate moment into the start of a reciprocal bond rather than a one-way charity storyline. And it also sets up an interesting contrast with Kendra's ex-wife. In his old marriage, he gave and then got discarded. In the Subrata orbit, he might give and then be valued. That's not just plot. That's healing. It's a corrective experience. It says, the world can recognize you. Not everyone will use you. Now, I want to be honest about a potential weakness that sometimes comes with these poor man enters rich world stories. They can accidentally romanticize wealth. The camera starts loving the mansions, the luxury cars, the expensive outfits, and the narrative becomes a tour of privilege. If the show is not careful, it can make poverty feel like an aesthetic and wealth feel like the only happy ending. The storyline's emphasis on honor and self-made career growth gives me hope that Kurir Jadi Suami Miliarder isn't just worshipping wealth. But the risk is always there. One-way dramas combat that is by making rich spaces feel emotionally sterile and by making working-class spaces feel emotionally alive. That contrast can be powerful, but it can also become simplistic in the other direction, like poor but happy propaganda. The more nuanced version is showing that both worlds have beauty and pain. Poor spaces can be stressful and exhausting. Rich spaces can be lonely and suffocating. People adapt. People survive. The point is not to glamorize either, it's to show how class shapes choices. And class absolutely shapes romance here. Because if Sinta is from a powerful family, her love has consequences. It's not just a feeling, it's a political act. Who she chooses reflects on the family. Who she chooses threatens someone's plans. Who she chooses might be used against her. That's why I'm hoping the drama plays her not as a rebel without cause, but as someone who understands the cost of every step she takes toward Kandra. Here's another miniscene type that this show can do really well if it leans into subtext. A public event where Sinta and Kandra have to present as a united couple, smiling for people who are waiting for them to slip. The camera flashes. The room noise is muffled under the score. Kandra's posture is stiff at first because he's not used to being displayed. Sinta's posture is practiced because she's been displayed her whole life. Their hands meet, either by choice or by necessity. And that hand contact becomes its own conversation. Is it supportive? Is it possessive? Is it performative? The audience feels the tension because the touch has multiple meanings at once. That's good romance writing, when one gesture can be read three ways. Also, can we talk about how contract marriages inherently invite misunderstandings, and how lazy misunderstandings can ruin your patience? I'm allergic to misunderstandings that exist only because characters refuse to speak like humans. But misunderstandings rooted in power imbalance, rooted in what characters are allowed to say, what they're afraid to reveal, what they think honesty will cost them, those can work. In a conglomerate family, honesty is risky. In a post-divorce trauma state, honesty is also risky. So if the show uses misunderstandings as a natural consequence of fear and power, I can forgive it. If it uses them as padding, I will start talking to my screen, and not in a cute way. Let me pull the camera back and talk structure again. The storyline indicates three major pressure streams: the ex-wife's traps, the contract marriage and Subrata politics, and Kandra's self-made rise culminating in saving the family from crisis. That's a lot to juggle, and it implies the show is going for a sweeping, rollercoaster arc rather than a quiet character study. So the craft challenge is integration. How do you make the ex-wife's traps connect to the Subrata crisis? How do you make the romance connect to Kandra's career growth? How do you make Kandra's personal healing connect to the family's external crisis? The best version is when all of those are the same story. The ex-wife represents transactional love. The contract marriage is transactional love formalized. Kandra's career rise is him proving that his worth is not transactional. The Subrata crisis is the rich family learning that their transactions can't buy everything. See what I mean? If the writers tie it together thematically, it sinks. If they don't, it becomes a pile of entertaining stuff that doesn't fully cohere. And when it comes to coherence, performances can do some patchwork. A good actor can carry a shaky plot by grounding every scene in a consistent internal logic. Even if the writing gets melodramatic, the actor's eyes can keep it human. That's why I keep coming back to micro-expressions. Kandra's shame, his pride, his cautious hope, those have to feel continuous across wild plot turns. If the show asks him to flip emotions on a dime without internal transitions, it will feel like a soap. If it lets him carry emotional residue from one scene to the next, it becomes immersive. Here's another rehook. The most important, Miliarder, part of this drama might not be money at all, it might be what money reveals about everybody's character when the pressure hits. Because money in stories like this is a truth serum. It doesn't create greed, it exposes it. It doesn't create kindness, it tests it. It doesn't create dignity, it challenges it. And Kurir Jadi Suami Miliarder is basically one long experiment in what people do when money is the scoreboard. I also appreciate that the storyline frames Kandra's rise as something he builds, because it allows the show to explore competence porn in a satisfying way. And I say porn affectionately here, because competence scenes are addictive. Watching a character solve problems with calm intelligence scratches a particular itch. It's why people love legal dramas, medical dramas, business dramas, seeing someone be good at something is satisfying. If Kendra's career arc gives us those moments, it can offset the emotional heaviness of the betrayals. But competence has to be dramatized, not just declared. We need to see his thinking. We need to see him make a decision that's not obvious. We need to see him take a risk that's smart, not reckless. We need to see him fail sometimes and adjust. That's what makes competence believable. And because he's a courier, his competence might look different than a corporate genius. It might be pattern recognition. It might be logistics thinking. It might be resilience under stress. It might be reading people's needs quickly. Those are real skills. They are undervalued because they are associated with service work. So when the drama lets those skills become heroic, it's not just satisfying, it's thematically aligned. Let's also not ignore the fact that this story is, at its core, about respect. Kandra wants respect from his ex-wife, respect from society, respect from the Subrata family, and ultimately respect from himself. Respect is not the same as love. Sometimes you can love someone and still disrespect them, which is exactly what transactional relationships do. They love you for what you provide while disrespecting your humanity. So when the storyline promises he achieves love and honor, that suggests he finally gets both affection and respect. That's the real happy ending, if the show earns it. Now, a quick note about humor in a drama like this. Humor can be a release valve. It can also be a character tool. If Kandra has moments of dry humor, it can make him feel resilient. It can show he's not just suffering, he has personality. But humor has to be grounded. If the show inserts slapstick at the wrong time, it undercuts the pain. If it lets humor arise from awkwardness, like Kandra trying to navigate rich etiquette, or misunderstanding a wealthy norm, it can be charming without being disrespectful. And yes, there's a fine line between fish out of water comedy and classist mockery. The show needs to make sure the joke is not, haha poor people, but haha this system is weird, or haha these rich rules are ridiculous, or haha humans are awkward. That's the ethical difference. Also, wardrobe. Wardrobe is storytelling here. Not just glow-up outfits, but how clothing fits on Kandra's body. Early on, clothes might hang like armor that doesn't fit. Later, even if he wears something expensive, he might still carry it differently. The show can use that to show internal change. A suit doesn't make a man confident. Confidence makes a suit look natural. If the drama understands that, you can watch his posture evolve over time and it becomes satisfying in a subtle way. Now, I want to address something that could be controversial, the fantasy of marrying into wealth as justice. Some viewers will watch this and feel validated, like, see? The loyal man gets rewarded. The shallow ex-wife loses. That's emotionally understandable. But it can also be a dangerous fantasy if the show implies that the only way out of poverty is romantic access to wealth. The storyline's emphasis on Kandra's self-made rise helps counter that, but the title itself can still pull people toward the wrong takeaway. I think the best way the drama can handle this is by making Kandra's dignity independent. Make his career success meaningful on its own. Make his problem-solving the thing that saves the Subratas, not his marriage certificate. Make the romance an added layer, not the only ladder. If it does that, then the billionaire marriage becomes a setting, not the message. Because there's a better message hiding under the trope, love should not be a reward for suffering. Love should be recognition of humanity. And Kandra's story, at its heart, is about someone who was treated as a tool reclaiming his personhood. And if the ex-wife's traps continue into the period where Kandra is rising, that can create a powerful contrast. She is stuck in a worldview where status is everything, so she keeps playing status games. Kandra evolves out of that worldview, so he stops reacting in predictable ways. That's how you make a villain's persistence backfire, not because the hero gets richer, but because the hero becomes unhookable. The villain can't bait him anymore. I'm going to tease something without spoiling. The most satisfying confrontations in this genre are not the loud ones. They are the calm ones. Because when Kandra finally faces someone who hurt him, whether it's his ex-wife, or a Subrata family member who disrespected him, or anyone who tried to trap him, the best payoff isn't him yelling. It's him being calm. Calm says, "You don't control my emotions anymore." Calm says, "You are not the center of my story." Calm is a flex. And if the actor playing Kandra can land that calm with a steady gaze and a voice that doesn't shake, it will be more devastating than any scream. Now, the Subrata family crisis. I keep circling it because it's the structural pivot promised in the storyline. A crisis forces characters to show their true priorities. It forces alliances. It forces betrayals. It forces Sinta to choose between family loyalty and personal morality. It forces Bhaskara to confront whether his empire is built on real strength or fragile image. And it forces Kandra to decide whether he wants to be part of this family at all beyond the contract. That last part is crucial. Because saving a family is intimate. It's not like saving a random company. When you save a family from crisis, you become part of their narrative. You become woven into their identity. That can be beautiful. It can also be suffocating. And for someone like Kandra, who has already been used as a ladder, the idea of being woven into someone else's legacy could be both flattering and terrifying. And that's where the theme of identity comes roaring back. Who is Kandra when he's not the ex-husband, not the poor courier, not the billionaire's husband, not the family's savior? Who is he when no one is watching? The drama's best chance at greatness is in answering that quietly, not just with plot wins. Another thing I want to highlight is how the show might portray honor, a social perception. Honor isn't just internal, it's external reputation. When Kandra is divorced for being poor, his honor is damaged in social eyes. When he marries into the Subrata family, his honor might be questioned as opportunism. When the ex-wife traps him, she's trying to destroy his honor by making him look guilty or incompetent. When he saves the Subratas, he earns honor through action. That's a coherent arc: honor lost, honor tested, honor restored. But again, the show has to be careful. Honor narratives can become moralizing. They can also become patriarchal if they treat honor as something a man owns and a woman can take. The healthier version is treating honor as dignity and respect, human values, not as possession. And I'll be honest, part of what makes this drama addictive is that it's playing with a fantasy that's both empowering and a little dark, the fantasy of being underestimated and then proving everyone wrong. That fantasy is universal. It's why underdog stories exist. But when you combine it with wealth and romance, it becomes even more emotionally charged, because it's not just, "I'm good at my job." It's, "I'm worthy." That's what Kandra is trying to prove, even when he shouldn't have to. That's why, for me, the moments that matter most are the ones where Kandra stops proving and starts being. Where he acts from self-respect rather than from the need to be validated. That's when the story transcends its trope. I also want to talk about the show's emotional manipulations in terms of music again, because if the drama is effective, it's probably using recurring motifs. A theme for Kandra's struggle, a theme for Subrata power, a theme for romance that starts as formal and becomes warmer over time. When a show uses motifs well, you start feeling emotional shifts before you consciously notice them. The romance theme might begin with a stiff piano line and later become fuller, softer. The Subrata theme might be sharp, percussive, like money counting. Those are choices that shape your experience. When those choices are too heavy-handed, you feel pushed. When they are subtle, you feel guided. And Kurir Jadi Suami Miliarder, in the way it's pitched, seems like the kind of drama that sometimes pushes and sometimes guides. The question is whether the push moments are balanced by genuine character beats. Let me be lightly self-aware for a second. Yes, I am the kind of viewer who rewinds a scene if a character's face did something interesting in the background. I know. I'm insufferable. But in shows like this, the background reactions are often where the truth is. Especially in rich family scenes. Someone might smile politely while their eyes sharpen. Someone might clap while their jaw tightens. Those micro-reactions tell you where alliances are forming and where resentment is building, even if the script doesn't say it out loud. And that ties back to the Subrata family politics. If the show wants to feel smart, it needs to let politics live in micro-behavior, not just in declarations. Real powerful people rarely announce their power. They demonstrate it through control of tone, timing, access. Who gets invited? Who gets ignored? Who gets interrupted? Who gets to end the conversation? And Kendra, as an outsider, initially won't have those tools. So watching him learn them, without becoming cruel, can be a satisfying arc in itself. It's like watching someone learn a new language, except the language is dominance. Here's another hook to keep you with me. The ex-wife isn't just a villain, she's a reminder that success doesn't automatically heal betrayal. Because even if Kendra becomes respected, even if he becomes powerful, the original wound might still ache. Betrayal is weird like that. You can win and still feel bruised. That's what makes healing different from revenge. Revenge is external. Healing is internal. And if the show is honest, it will let Kendra's healing take time. It will let him mistrust kindness. It will let him flinch at affection. It will let him struggle to believe Cinta's feelings when they start to shift from contract to real. That's where my emotional investment really sits. Not, will they end up together, but will Kendra be able to receive love without bargaining for it? And Cinta's arc, if it's done with care, could mirror that in reverse. She might have grown up surrounded by conditional relationships, people who are close to her because of the Subrata name, people who smile because they want something. For her, unconditional affection might feel suspicious. So both characters could be learning the same lesson from opposite sides of class. Love that isn't transactional is rare, and it's terrifying. Now, I'm going to be a bit critical again, because I think the show will need to earn its emotional payoffs. The premise is heavy on justice. It wants the audience to feel like the moral universe will correct itself. Kendra will rise, the ex-wife will fail, the Subratas will be saved, love and honor will be achieved. That's satisfying. But if the show makes the moral universe too neat, it becomes fairy tale. Real dignity is messy. Real growth includes backsliding. Real love includes misunderstandings that aren't cute. The show can still be melodrama and be honest. Those aren't mutually exclusive. The best melodramas are honest in emotion even when the plot is heightened. Another thing I'm watching for is whether the show allows Kendra to be wrong sometimes. Not morally wrong, but human wrong. Does he misjudge someone? Does he make a choice out of pride? Does he struggle with resentment? If the show makes him flawless, it makes him less relatable, and it makes his victories feel predetermined. If he's allowed to be messy, his honor becomes earned rather than assigned. And if Cinta is allowed to be messy too, if she sometimes prioritizes family image and later regrets it, if she sometimes misreads Kendra, if she sometimes uses power reflexively, then she becomes a person rather than a prize. That's what I want. I don't want her to be a trophy that proves Kendra is worthy. I want her to be a character with her own stakes. Okay, one more craft thing, the show's use of traps. Traps can mean schemes, misunderstandings, setups, accusations, business sabotage, social sabotage. Whatever form they take, traps are about control. The ex-wife is trying to control Kendra's narrative. The Subrata world is trying to control Kendra's role. The contract marriage is trying to control perception. And Kendra's arc is about escaping control by becoming someone who controls his own story. So the traps aren't just plot devices. They are thematic. Every time he escapes a trap, he's reclaiming authorship. Every time he falls into one, he's reminded how fragile his position is. That's why the repetition can work if it's escalated and varied. It's not just, oh no, another scheme. It's, oh no, another attempt to erase his agency. And the most satisfying escape from traps isn't always outsmart them. Sometimes it's refuse to play. Refusal is a kind of victory. It's also a sign of maturity. I'll leave you with a question that the show seems poised to answer later. When Kendra finally earns the Subrata family's respect, will it be because they recognize his humanity, or because he becomes useful to their empire? Because those are not the same kind of respect. One is dignity. The other is utility. and a drama about honor should know the difference. And honestly, that question spills directly into the romance, because if Cinta's affection begins as part of the contract and evolves into something real, the show needs to show the pivot point where she stops seeing Kandra as a solution to a problem and starts seeing him as a person she can't unsee. The kind of shift that happens not in a grand confession but in a small, stubborn moment where she watches him choose the hard right thing over the easy wrong thing, and suddenly her whole understanding of what strength looks like starts to change, and she realizes she's been living in a world where strength meant dominance, but with him it means restraint, and that realization is where their dynamic can really deepen if the drama lets it linger long enough for you to feel the air get heavier between them, not with lust, but with recognition, and that's where the show's best romantic tension lives for me, not in the obvious, they are trapped in the same house, stuff, but in that slow recalibration of what each of them thinks a spouse is supposed to be. Because Kandra comes from a marriage where love was treated like a loan that didn't get repaid, and Cinta comes from a family where marriage is treated like a strategic alliance you manage with a straight face. So when recognition hits between them, it can't just be butterflies. It's a collision of survival philosophies. And this is where I need the drama to be brave in a very specific way. I need it to let the romance be inconvenient. If Cinta's world is truly as political as a conglomerate family usually is, then any warmth she shows Kandra should have consequences. If everyone around them is watching, then tenderness should be risky. A good drama doesn't treat intimacy as a reward, it treats it as a vulnerability. It's one thing to sign a contract. It's another thing to reach for someone's hand in a room full of people who would love to see you bleed. Here's a little craft detail that separates trope from story: timing. When does the show allow them to be soft? If the soft moments come too early, the contract feels pointless. If the soft moments come too late, the romance feels like an afterthought. The sweet spot is when softness arrives unexpectedly in the middle of conflict, almost like an accident. Like Cinta snapping at someone on Kandra's behalf and then looking surprised at her own protectiveness. Like Kandra doing something small, quietly, without announcing it, that makes her realize he's paying attention to her as a person, not as a soup rotter. And if the actors can sell those accidents, you'll feel the shift without needing the script to circle it with a highlighter. It's funny, because in these stories the contract is supposed to be the unreal part and the feelings are supposed to be the real part. But emotionally, I often experience it the other way around. The contract feels real because it's explicit and structured and frankly very plausible in a world ruled by wealth. The feelings are the part that has to be proven. The show has to earn them scene by scene, glance by glance, choice by choice. And speaking of choices, Kandra's career arc is the part one keep coming back to as the spine of the story. Because romance is powerful, yes, but competence is what changes the room. When the storyline says he builds a career, I don't just hear he got promoted. I hear he became someone with leverage. And leverage is what allows dignity to stop being theoretical. When you have leverage, you can walk away. When you don't, you're stuck bargaining with your own boundaries. So the career building isn't just a subplot, it's the mechanism of his self-respect. If the drama is smart, it will frame Kandra's rising competence as a direct response to being underestimated. Not as revenge, but as self-protection. Like, I will never again be in a position where someone can discard me and I have nothing. That's not greed. That's trauma learning. That's someone building armor out of skill. Now, wait a second, because there's a trap for the audience here too, and it's a subtle one. It's very easy to root for Kandra's success and accidentally start rooting for him to become ruthless. This is the part where viewers sometimes confuse power with cruelty. We want him to clap back. We want him to humiliate the people who humiliated him. We want him to become untouchable. And the show will absolutely tempt us with that. But if the drama's theme is honor, then it has to resist turning him into a bully with better clothes. That's why I keep saying restraint is the real flex. The most satisfying revenge is when Kandra doesn't need to do anything dramatic because his life itself becomes the rebuttal. When his existence becomes the proof. When the people who mocked him start needing him, and he's calm about it. Calm is the kind of revenge that doesn't rot you from the inside. Here's another thing I found unexpectedly compelling. The the way the ex-wife thread can function like a psychological echo. Even if Kandra is physically far from her, even if his circumstances change completely, the ex-wife's voice can remain inside his head as an internal critic. You're not enough. You're embarrassing. You're poor. Those words don't just vanish when you get a contract marriage. They stick. So when she keeps trying to trap him, it's not only external conflict, it's the story forcing him to confront the part of himself that still believes her. That's why, as much as people might hate her, I actually think she's crucial to the drama's emotional integrity. The show shouldn't let Kandra's healing be too clean. It shouldn't let him simply upgrade into a new world and pretend the old pain didn't happen. Trauma doesn't respect set changes. But again, this relies on the writing treating her as more than a hate sink. If she exists purely so the audience can cheer when she loses, it's cheap. If she exists to embody the worldview that love is transactional and that poverty is shameful, and if Kandra's journey is about rejecting that worldview, then she's thematically essential. And yes, I'm aware that I'm giving a lot of credit to what the show could do. That's partly because I'm sticking to light spoilers and partly because the storyline summary gives us the skeleton, not every organ. But as a reviewer, you can still judge the bones, the arc promise, the thematic engines, the kinds of scenes the premise demands. Here's a rehook that matters. The real villain in Kurir Jadi Suami Miliarder might not be any character at all, it might be the idea that a person's value can be measured. Because every major dynamic in this story is about measurement. The ex-wife measures Kandra by wealth. The Subrata family measures him by usefulness and optics. The contract measures him by compliance. And Kandra's arc is about rejecting measurement as identity. He's not a number. He's not a good investment. He's not a risk. He's a person. And that's why I keep emphasizing the show's quieter beats, because that theme can't land through plot alone. It needs human moments. It needs Kandra alone, thinking. It needs him making choices nobody applauds. It needs him refusing the easy path. If the show gives him those moments, it becomes more than just a juicy setup. Let's talk about the Subrata crisis angle with a little more nuance, because saving the family from crisis can mean a lot in melodrama. It could be financial collapse. It could be reputational scandal. It could be internal betrayal. It could be a business catastrophe. Whatever it is, the important part is what it reveals about the family's moral core. Conglomerate families in dramas are often portrayed as strong because of money, but fragile because of ego. They have power, but they also have paranoia. They can buy silence, but they can't buy trust. So when a crisis hits, it tends to expose the cracks that were always there, siblings or relatives competing, allies turning, reputations becoming more important than truth. And then the outsider, Kandra, can become the one person who isn't tied into their internal poison. He might actually be able to act decisively because he's not fighting for inheritance or face. He's fighting for something simpler, right and wrong. But again, it depends on the writing. A crisis can be used as spectacle, or it can be used as character revelation. I'm always more impressed when it's the latter. And there's a little structural elegance possible here. Kandra helps Bhaskara early on, then later he helps the entire family in a larger way. That's escalation that feels coherent. It turns his initial act of goodness into a seed that grows. It says, this is who he is. He helps. Not because it's profitable, but because he's wired that way. If the show keeps that internal consistency, Kandra stays believable even as the plot gets bigger. Now I want to linger on Bhaskara Subrata one more time, because patriarch figures can accidentally flatten a story. If Bhaskara is too wise and too supportive, he removes conflict. If he's too cruel, he becomes a cartoon. The interesting Bhaskara is someone who sees Kandra's worth, yes, but also someone who has his own agenda. Not necessarily a villainous agenda, just a powerful person agenda. Powerful people rarely do anything without calculating impact. Even kindness can be strategic when you're at the top. If Bhaskara offers a contract marriage arrangement, that implies he's willing to shape lives like pieces on a board. That's not inherently evil. It's just chilling. And a smart drama will let that chill exist, even as it frames Bhaskara as someone who can be admirable. Because people are like that. The same person who does a good deed can also be controlling. The same person who protects you can also trap you. And that brings us back to the contract itself. Is it protection, or is it a cage? Kandra might initially accept the contract for survival or opportunity, but as he grows, he might start questioning the terms, not just of the marriage, but of the entire Subrata world. If the show lets him push back, if it lets him renegotiate his role, that's when the story becomes about empowerment rather than rescue. One of my favorite kinds of scenes in dramas like this is the negotiation scene that isn't framed as a negotiation. The conversation is polite, the tone is soft, but the stakes are sharp. Someone says, "We think this is best." Someone else says, "I disagree." And you can feel the power shift not through volume, but through control of language. Kandra, if he's written well, will learn how to speak in that world without losing his authenticity. He'll learn their language and then use it to defend his dignity rather than to manipulate. And if Sinta is written well, she'll recognize the difference. She'll see that he's not playing games for dominance. He's learning to survive without surrendering. Another rehook, the show's most satisfying payoff might not be Kandra getting richer, it might be Kandra becoming embarrassable. Because that's the core of his initial wound. His ex-wife treated him like he was embarrassing. Poverty was framed as shame. But what if Kandra reaches a point where shame no longer sticks? Where insults bounce off because he doesn't believe them? That's the kind of transformation you can't buy. That's inner wealth. And yes, that's cheesy phrasing, but it's also true. Emotional resilience is the one miliarder status that actually matters. There's also something quietly radical, depending on how it's handled, about a story where a working-class man's honor is not defined by his ability to dominate, but by his ability to endure with integrity. So many male-centered arcs go from humiliated to violent to respected. That's the cheap road. The better road is humiliated to aware to skilled to respected. Skill and self-respect become the path, not aggression. If Kurir Jadi Suami Miliarder commits to that, it becomes more than a guilty pleasure. It becomes an actually solid character drama wrapped in a shiny premise. But I'm not going to pretend it's perfect. The melodrama engine can sometimes make the show feel like it's chasing viral moments rather than building emotional logic. Traps, humiliations, sudden confrontations, those are addictive. But addiction isn't always artistry. There's a version of this drama that could have been more restrained, more psychologically detailed, and it would have been stronger. The question is whether the show's audience is here for restraint. And honestly, a lot of people are here to feel something loud. That's not inherently bad. It's just a different artistic goal. Still, even within loud melodrama, the show can make choices that respect the viewer's intelligence. It can avoid twisting characters into nonsense just to create conflict. It can avoid making everyone irrational so the plot can happen. It can avoid cheap misunderstandings. It can keep its emotional continuity. Those are the standards I hold it to. I'm also interested in how the show portrays career as identity. For Kandra, career growth is part of his liberation. But it can also become a new trap. If he becomes defined only by success, then he's still being measured, just by a different metric. The real win is when he can succeed without being enslaved by the scoreboard. When he can choose love and dignity even if it costs him opportunity. That's where honor becomes real. And that's where Sinta's role can be fascinating, because she might represent the world of scoreboards. Not because she's shallow, but because she's been raised inside metrics, status, reputation, optics. She might genuinely care about Kandra and still reflexively worry about what people will think. That's a real human conflict. Love doesn't erase conditioning overnight. Now, I want to say something that might sound like a nitpick but isn't. How the show handles saving matters. If Kandra saves the Subrata family, I want it to feel like he's saving people, not worshipping wealth. There's a difference between, I'm grateful to the rich family for giving me a chance, so I'll sacrifice anything for them, and I will help because it's right, and because my values don't change based on who is rich. The second one is honor. The first one is servitude dressed as gratitude. A drama can accidentally blur those, especially when it's emotionally rewarding to see the poor protagonist accepted by the elite. But acceptance isn't the same as respect. And respect isn't the same as equality. If the show truly wants to land that honor theme, it needs to let Chandra keep his spying even when he's surrounded by luxury. Here's another cinematic beat I wish every drama like this would include, because it's such a pure test of character. A moment where someone offers Chandra money to do something wrong, casually, like it's nothing. Not even as a threat, more like a suggestion. We can make this easier for you. And Chandra pauses. You feel the weight of his past poverty, the years of struggle, the temptation. And then he refuses, not dramatically, not self-righteously. Just, calmly. Like refusing to betray himself is as natural as breathing. That kind of scene, if played well, can be more powerful than any revenge moment. And it also gives Sinta a chance to see him clearly. Because what's attractive about Chandra isn't his proximity to money, it's his resistance to being bought. That resistance is rare in a world like hers. One more thing about the ex-wife, the best possible use of her continued sabotage is not to turn her into a final boss, but to show how desperation and status hunger can hollow a person out. If she keeps trapping Chandra even after he's moved on, that suggests obsession. Obsession comes from emptiness. Again, not excusing, diagnosing. The tragedy of characters like that is that they keep chasing, winning, because they don't know how to live with themselves otherwise. And if the show is willing to let that tragedy be visible, it becomes richer. And this is where my contrarian take sharpens. Sometimes the most interesting character in a drama isn't the hero or the love interest, it's the antagonist who reveals the ugliest truths about the world. If the ex-wife is written with any complexity, she can become a commentary on how education, ambition, and insecurity can curdle when mixed with shame. She can represent the fear of falling, the obsession with climbing, the belief that love is an accessory. She can be the ghost of a system that convinces people that being poor is a moral failure. If the show gives her that dimension, she stops being a cartoon and starts being a warning. But if it just uses her for cheap hate, it wastes a chance. Another rehook, the moment Chandra becomes essential to the Subrata family is the moment the power fantasy flips, and that's where the show either becomes thrilling or becomes ridiculous. Because once Chandra is essential, the story's tension changes. It's no longer, will he survive humiliation? It's, what will he do with leverage? And writing leverage is harder because it forces the protagonist to make morally complex decisions. It's easy to write someone suffering. It's harder to write someone choosing. So if the show pulls it off, that's where it will win my respect the most. Also, the romance under leverage gets more complicated. If Chandra becomes powerful, does Sinta feel threatened? Does she feel relieved? Does she feel proud? Does she feel like she's losing control of the narrative? The most interesting romantic conflicts aren't about jealousy over a third person, they're about identity shifts. When one partner changes, the relationship has to renegotiate itself. In a contract marriage that becomes real, renegotiation is basically the whole point. And speaking of renegotiation, I want the show to understand that contracts aren't just papers, they are mindsets. Even if the contract ends, the mindset can remain. What do I owe you? What do you owe me? What are the terms? The romance becomes real when they stop talking in terms and start talking in trust. Trust is the opposite of contract. Trust is risk. If you've ever been burned in a relationship, you know how hard it is to trust again. Even when someone is good to you, you look for the hidden condition. You look for the moment they'll turn. You look for the price. Chandra's divorce gives him every reason to be wary. So when love starts to form with Sinta, it should feel like a fight inside him. Not just external obstacles, but internal ones. The best scenes would show him wanting to believe and being terrified too. That's where my emotional confession comes back in, because I felt that war in him in a way that made me uncomfortable. Not because it's badly done, but because it's familiar. There's a particular kind of heartbreak where you don't just lose a person, you lose your ability to feel safe with love. You become suspicious of tenderness. And watching a character rebuild that ability, slowly, awkwardly, can be weirdly healing as a viewer. It makes you feel seen, and also exposed. Now, to keep it grounded in craft, that internal war has to be shown, not told. And that's acting, music, and directing. Acting shows it through hesitation, through half-finished sentences, through eyes that soften and then harden. Music can either support it subtly or ruin it by telling you exactly what to feel. Directing shows it through framing, distance between characters, obstacles in the frame, reflections, doorways, the way characters share space. And editing matters because internal war requires rhythm. You need pauses. You need beats where the camera lingers just a second longer than comfortable. If the show cuts too fast, you lose the sense that the characters are thinking. You lose the intimacy. Let's zoom in on one more subtle but important theme, shame versus guilt. Chandra is not guilty of being poor. But he's been made to feel ashamed. Shame is identity-based, I am bad. Guilt is action-based, I did something bad. The drama's early betrayal is shame-based. That's why it's so corrosive. And his arc is basically a journey from shame to dignity. The ex-wife's traps are attempts to re-shame him. The Subrata world's judgment is another shame machine. His career competence is an antidote. His love with Sinta, if it becomes real, is another antidote. That's solid thematic architecture. The show just has to execute it without collapsing into cliché. And yes, there will be cliché. It's melodrama. Part of the genre is cliché. The difference is whether the cliché feels like comfort food or like stale leftovers. Comfort clichés are tropes executed with care. Stale clichés are tropes executed with laziness. I'll give you an example of a comfort cliché, the moment a rich family member tries to humiliate the poor protagonist and the love interest quietly intervenes, not with a speech, but with a simple act like standing beside him or changing the subject. That's cliché, but it can be satisfying because it's about solidarity. Stale cliché is when someone screams, "You don't belong here," in a room full of people like they're auditioning for a villain role, and everyone else just stares like NPCs, and the protagonist stands there taking it because the plot needs him to. That's when I start losing patience. Another thing, saving the Subrata family from crisis can easily become a tangle of plot that the audience doesn't emotionally connect with if it's too business-heavy. If it's just company trouble, you need character stakes. Who gets hurt if the family falls? Who loses more than money? Who loses identity? Who loses relationships? The show has to translate crisis into human consequences. That's how you keep a business plot from feeling like spreadsheet drama. And Chandra's heroism in that crisis needs to feel like it costs him something. Not necessarily money, maybe it costs him comfort, safety, reputation, or peace. Honor is expensive. If saving them is too easy, it's not honorable, it's convenient. Here's another rehook that I kept thinking about. The story starts with Chandra paying for someone else's education, so what does he do when he finally gets the chance to invest in himself? That's such a potent question, because it's not only financial. It's emotional. Does he invest in his skills, his health, his dreams? Or does he keep pouring into other people because that's the only way he knows how to be loved? That's a deep character issue. And the show's promise that he rises with his own ability suggests that at some point, he chooses himself. That's a huge moment, psychologically. For someone who has been a giver, choosing yourself feels selfish at first. It can come with guilt. It can come with fear that you'll be abandoned. So if the show portrays that transition, even subtly, it becomes much more than a rich marriage fantasy. It becomes a story about self-worth. And Sinta, again, could be central to that in a non-savior way. She might challenge him by refusing to let him martyr himself. Or she might challenge him by expecting him to carry weight he shouldn't have to. Either way, the dynamic can reveal a lot about both of them. Now, because I'm a reviewer and not just a cheerleader, I'll say this, the show's premise is so inherently satisfying that it can get away with a lot. Viewers will forgive clunky dialogue, convenient coincidences, exaggerated villains, because the emotional core is strong. Betrayed underdog rises into respect, people love that. But forgiveness has limits. If the show repeatedly violates character logic just to create drama, that emotional core starts to crack. So my biggest hope for Kurir Jadi Suami Miliarder is consistency. Not realism, consistency. Melodrama doesn't need to be realistic. It needs to be emotionally truthful. If Chandra is written as a man of integrity, don't make him suddenly petty just for a cool moment. If Sinta is written as smart, don't make her oblivious just to create a misunderstanding. If Bhaskara is written as powerful, don't make him incompetent just so Chandra can shine. Let everyone be competent in their own ways. That makes victories feel earned. And if you're wondering why I keep harping on this, it's because the storyline includes a major competence payoff. Chandra saves the Subrata family. If everyone else is written as foolish, that payoff becomes hollow. If everyone else is written as capable but constrained, by ego, by politics, by fear, then Chandra's unique advantage can shine without diminishing them. That's better drama. I also want to touch briefly on the release year context, because 2026 audiences are not the same as 2016 audiences. People are more sensitive to class narratives now. They are more aware of how wealth is portrayed. They are more likely to call out stories that glamorize billionaire power without critique. So if this drama wants to feel current, it needs at least a hint of awareness that wealth is not inherently virtuous and that poor people are not poor because they are lazy. The premise already aligns with that. Chandra is hardworking and still poor. Good. That's honest. Now the rest of the story needs to keep that honesty. And I'll say this, even with its heightened premise, the show has a chance to do something quietly radical by portraying a courier as someone with intelligence, dignity, and strategic capability. Service work is so often treated as background in media. Making it central, making it heroic, is meaningful. It tells viewers who do that kind of work that they are not invisible. Another rehook, because this is the emotional cliff that keeps the audience glued. When the contract starts turning into real love, does Chandra believe it, or does he sabotage it because he's afraid it's another trap? That's the heartbreak risk. And it's where the drama can hurt you in a good way if it chooses. The temptation for writers is to make romance smooth once the feelings arrive. But smooth romance is boring. What's interesting is the friction of trust. The fear of repeating history. The vulnerability of letting someone matter again. And if the show wants to earn its eventual love and honor payoff, it needs to let that fear have weight. Not endless angst, weight. There's a difference. Endless angst is repetitive suffering. Weight is meaningful struggle. I'm also curious about how the show balances external antagonism with internal growth. Because if the ex-wife is constantly trapping Chandra, and the Subrata world is constantly testing him, you can end up with a protagonist who never gets a quiet moment to process. And processing is where characters deepen. Without it, you get a sequence of events but not an arc. So I hope the show gives Chandra breathing room. Scenes where he's not being attacked or praised, just thinking, deciding, becoming. Those scenes can be deceptively hard to write. They require confidence. They are not flashy. But they are what make a character feel like a human. One small, self-aware aside before I go back into serious mode: if I were in a contract marriage with a conglomerate heir, I would last exactly 12 minutes before I said something wrong at dinner and got exiled. Chandra's patience is heroic on a level I can only aspire to. Okay, back to it. There's also the question of what kind of love story this is. Is it, he heals her and she heals him? Is it, they become a team? Is it, they survive the world together? The premise suggests partnership, especially if Chandra ends up saving the family from crisis. If Sinta is involved in that in any way, even emotionally, even strategically, then the romance becomes a joint arc, not a side dish. And the best romances in high-stakes family dramas are team romances. Not perfect harmony, but shared purpose. Two people who trust each other enough to coordinate, to plan, to protect. That's romantic not because it's cute, but because it's respect made visible. Now, I'm still keeping it light on spoilers, so I'm going to avoid, this happens then this happens, but I want to stay honest about the genre expectations. Audiences will want payback. They'll want the ex-wife confronted. They'll want the Subrata family to acknowledge Chandra. They'll want the contract to become real. They'll want honor restored publicly, not just privately. The show has those promises baked in. So the real question is not whether it will deliver any payoff, it probably will. The question is how it delivers, with cruelty or with dignity, with cheap shots or with earned turns, with shallow wish fulfillment or with actual emotional truth. And for me, the most emotionally satisfying payoffs in stories like this are often the ones that aren't about humiliation. They're about recognition. A character who dismissed you looks at you differently. They don't even need to apologize. You just see the shift in their eyes. That's powerful because it's subtle. It's not, I win. It's, you see me now. That's what Chandra has been denied. Being seen. If the show builds to that kind of recognition, especially from within the Subrata family, especially from Bhaskara, especially from Sinta in a way that's not performative, then it can be genuinely moving. But the show also has to be careful about tying recognition too tightly to success. Because the deeper message should be that Chandra was worthy even when he was a poor courier. His worth didn't begin when he entered the Subrata mansion. It didn't begin when he signed a contract. It didn't begin when he built a career. Those are circumstances. His worth is intrinsic. The show's job is to communicate that, even while giving us the satisfaction of his rise. That's a hard balancing act. A lot of dramas fail it. They accidentally imply, see? Now that he's rich and respected, he matters. And I want this drama to say, he always mattered. You just refuse to acknowledge it. The premise is set up for that message. I hope the execution follows through.